Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 6th of January of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Before we start with Ukraine, I would like to discuss with you a very interesting and a very strange topic. I would like to discuss with you vessels that are going from the territory of Venezuela all over the world. For example, today we got reports that multiple Russian, Chinese and Iranian shadow tankers carrying stolen US crude have begun departing the ports of Venezuela in what looks like a coordinated effort to breach the naval blockade. The old tankers are stateless, flying false flags. So what is this? Very interesting question, but it's normal situation right now for Venezuela, but the most important tanker and the most important situation is taking place with the Russian vessel. The Russian oil tanker Marinera, which has been evading the US military since December 24, is currently under constant surveillance by Boeing Poseidon patrol aircrafts of the US Navy west of Ireland. It is also reported that more than, 8 Globemasters military transport aircraft have arrived at one of the British air bases, along with at least 5 Black Hawks multi-purpose helicopters, which could be used to deploy special forces to board the tanker that was lost in the Caribbean Sea region. So something strange with these vessels that are going from the territory of Venezuela. If you ask my opinion, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems that at least this vessel that goes under the flag of the Russian Federation doesn't have oil on board. It seems that there are cash, gold and something else. So which means that too many people in the world, too many states would like to find out what exactly on the board of this vessel that is heading towards the territory of the Russian Federation. But most likely this vessel is not alone. We believe that there are military forces of the Russian Federation around this vessel, or at least below the vessel. I believe that in coming days we will see lots of very interesting things that might happen with this vessel. And furthermore, I would like to point your attention that the president of the Russian Federation still hasn't made even a single comment regarding the situation with Venezuela and regarding statements that were made by the Western countries, by the United States of America on this matter. It seems that the president of Russia is waiting for something. Maybe he's waiting for this vessel. Maybe he's waiting when this vessel arrives on the territory of Russia or enters a safe zone, and only then he will make statements. So two interesting situations, telling the truth. Anyway, let's switch on to the Europe, and first let's talk about France. Today, according to information we have, the coalition of willing is having a meeting, and there are lots of very interesting updates we received from this area. Negotiations in Paris on security guarantees for Ukraine are essentially boiling down to working out a plan for permanent NATO military presence on Russia's borders, according to Bloomberg. We had lots of reports about the situation, but it seems that it's not just the summit of coalition of willing. There are too many people from the United States of America, from Europe, from Ukraine as well. It seems that there is a plan, that they're working on some plan. Maybe they're planning to carry out something like a special operation through the world, that the European countries, Ukraine, the Western countries, the United States of America would be involved, and this operation will probably take part at many regions at the same time. Maybe Iran, maybe the conflict in Ukraine, maybe some other places like Cuba, or the Latin America like Mexico. So two strange things are happening right now through the world, especially in France, in the United States of America. And to tell the truth, I believe that in coming days we will see what exactly is happening, or at least was planned to happen. Now let's switch on back to Ukraine. Let's discuss the situation. As you noted, most likely you've noted that the front line has stalled. So we don't see changes, we don't see offensives, we don't see, let's say, tanks, dozens of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles trying to bridge the Ukraine's defense. We don't see anything like this. And most likely this situation is connected first of all with weather, which is very, very awful along the line of combat contact. For example, when talking about the city of Kupiansk in the Kupiansk region, the level of snow is more than 14 centimeters. And the next days, the situation will only worsen because we can see a very cold temperature weather during the next days. Furthermore, most likely the situation is connected, the complete absence of any movements along the line of combat contact is connected with the Orthodox Christmas that is going to take place tomorrow on the 7th of January 2026. The Russians usually reduce their activities along the line of combat contact during the Christmas holidays. And of course, the most important reason why we don't see anything in Ukraine or along the line of combat contact from the Russian side is that currently all media all through the world are, let's say, watching just in one direction. We're talking about the United States of America, we're talking about Maduro, we're talking about Denmark and Greenland, we are talking about France and the coalition of willing. So that's why the Russians don't want to waste their media energy. They're waiting when the situation will stabilize, and then they will start. Anyway, you know that even due to the fact that the front line has started, the situation brought us very interesting videos and very interesting something new in the special military operation. Let's discuss everything. And first, let's talk about the northern parts of Ukraine, about the northern part of the Sumy region. During the previous 24 hours, Russians published this video where we can see how a Russian drone attacked the bridge that was mined, most likely by Ukrainian forces, and then the bridge was destroyed. There was a very heavy explosion, as you can see. So this episode took place right exactly at this point in the area of this bridge. This bridge was destroyed. And once again, I would like to remind you that this area, Ukraine uses this area as a launching site to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation with hundreds of drones. By the way, during the previous 24 hours, Ukraine launched another batch of drones deep inside of Russia. Just between 8 and 11 p.m., Russians brought down 55 drones. Between 4 and 8 p.m., 42 drones. Between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., the Russians destroyed 129 drones. So as you can see, just during the previous 24 hours, up to 200 drones were once again destroyed by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And the most important thing that all these attacks tell us just about one thing. Ukraine is trying to soften the air defense of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the direction of the city of Moscow. So, for example, they're trying to soften air defense. They're trying to force Russians to, let's say, bring additional air defense systems in this area, additional missiles, which obviously can soften few more directions, few more air defenses through the entire territory of the Russian Federation, and Ukraine may launch their main strike not even in the Moscow direction, but somewhere else. And most likely this might happen also in coming days. But at the same time, we don't have anything regarding Russia's stockpiles of missiles, of drones that the Russians have already created. They are ready for their massive attack, but for some reason we don't have anything about this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 24 hours and due to bad weather conditions, the Russians were mainly focused on the territory of the settlement of Ovchansky Hutory. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the settlement. We believe that in coming days, the map would be adjusted in this area, and there are very likely that maybe in coming days, even the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation can give us additional information about the situation there. The city of Kupiansk, the situation is crazy. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 5th of January, and this is the situation by the end of the 6th of January. As you can see, Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlements of Tishinkovka and Kondrashevka. We came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by very reliable pro-Russian sources. Here we can see some farms in the eastern part of the settlement, and here we can see two Russian soldiers that were friendly waving with their hands in the direction of the Russian drone that was flying above this territory. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that Russians have a very strong control over the territory of Kondrashevka and Tishinkovka. So, and what is happening right now? Using two words or using just simple words, it's the beginning or It's the intensifying of the fifth battle for the city of Kupiansk. There were 4 battles for the city of Kupiansk. 2 of them took place in 2022 when the Russians first took under control, then Ukrainians recaptured in the late 2022. Then the 3rd battle for Kupiansk took place in 2025 when Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and in the late 2025 the Ukrainians once again recaptured the city of Kupiansk, and now we are witnessing the beginning or already the middle part of the 5th battle for the city of Kupiansk. And as you can see, the Russians are doing the same thing as they did during the 3rd battle for the city. You know that this is a very interesting situation because when Russians managed to establish complete control over the city of Kupiansk, they lost control of the city too fast and too easy, according to my understanding of the situation. The Russians were forced to fall back and they lost up to 90% of the territories on the western bank of the river Oskol. Mainly according to geolocations, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, of course, the pro-Russian sources are denying this situation, but now we see that the Russians began advancing once again, and this time the Russians are attacking along R79 road. So this is the situation, for example, on the ground. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 30th of December, and since the end of 2025, the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly along R79 road in the northern part of the city of Kupiansk. And you know what this situation does remind me? It's the same situation as we used to see during the 3rd battle of the city of Kupiansk. If you remember, first Russians crossed the river Oskol and managed to improve their positions around the villages of Zapadnaya and Dvorechna. The Russians created a very strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river, and then from these positions the Russians began advancing in the northern part, in the direction of the northern part of the city of Kupiansk, and when the Russians answered the northern part in the northwestern part of the city, then the Russians improved their position significantly, and during the next 2 or 3 months the Russians secured the city completely. Later, Ukrainians counterattacked and the Russians lost everything once again. And now we see that the Russians are doing the same thing. They're repeating the 3rd battle of the city of Kupiansk. First, they answered Kondrashevka, then they improved their positions in Tishinkovka. Now the Russians have established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines and logistic of the armored forces of Ukraine. Ukrainians currently suffer huge problems with logistic and manpower and with everything that the contingent of the armored forces of Ukraine requires on the territory of the city of Kupiansk, and now the Russians are doing the same as they did half a year ago. They will start moving from the settlements of Tishinkovka and Kondrashevka in the southern direction. Then Russians will improve their positions around the settlement of Mirova. Then Russians will improve their positions in the northwestern part of the city of Kupiansk. Then Russians will advance further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Sobolevka. Then Russians will continue advancing further in the southern direction towards the Yubileyny micro-district. So they will do the same thing as they did half a year ago, but with one difference. During the 1st battle for the city of Kupiansk, one Ukrainian army suffered huge losses and were forced to fall back from this area. Then Ukrainians counterattacked and they brought fresh forces on the territory of the city of Kupiansk, and now the Russians will try to do the same thing they did 6 months ago with the 2nd Ukrainian army in the area of the city of Kupiansk. So this is the situation, and from this perspective, of course, let's follow how exactly the things are going to develop in the northern part of the city. But it seems that the Russians, let's say, fell back the Russians gave up the city of Kupiansk just with one purpose and with the reason to allow Ukrainians to bring fresh forces and additional army on the territory of the city, and now the Russians are going to do the same thing. So this is the situation. Let's wait and see what is going to be next, but it seems that the situation is too complicated. Another important thing is that during the previous days, the Russians launched or opened the 3rd front line in the Kupiansk direction, and this time we are talking about the southeastern part. When talking about the previous year, Mainly, the Russians were fighting for the city of Kupiansk from the north, and the main clashes were taking place to the east of the city of Kupiansk. And during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates from the southeastern part, from the territory, which was mainly a very calm direction without big heavy clashes between Russians and Ukrainians. But this time we see that everything changes. The Russians began advancing in the southeastern part of the Kupiansk agglomeration, trying to approach the settlement of Kovsharovka from the southeastern direction, and then from these positions to advance in the direction of the city of Kupiansk-Zlovov, also from the southeastern part. So it seems that the Russians believe that this direction could be the final and the focal direction for the battle for the entire eastern bank of the city of the river Oskol. Now let's talk about the central Kupiansk direction. We are talking about the Barova area. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of important updates. And the first one, and probably the most important one, is the line of combat contact that was provided by a very reliable pro-Russian source. He says that this is exactly the situation in the Kupiansk direction. So more or less, this is exactly what we can see right now in this area. But when talking about the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, when talking about the official pro-Russian sources, the map in this area looks like this, because during December of 2025, the Russians stated that they managed to establish complete control over the settlements of Boguslavka, Novoplatonovka, over all these territories. And when talking about this map, the difference is huge. According to several pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the map and the configuration of the line of combat contact in the Barova direction. So all these territories are under control of the armored forces of Ukraine. Either the Ukrainians managed to recapture them as a result of counterattacks, or these territories were never under control of Russians. So as of now, very difficult to say what is happening, but I'm not saying that this pro-Russian source is telling is describing the exact situation on the ground. Because when talking about geolocations, most of them are coming not from this area. Most of them are coming from the city of Barova itself. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area with FPV drones. And it seems that all these videos show us not just like logistic control, but it shows us the assault process. It seems that the clashes are already taking place on the territory of Barova. So as of now, we have too many questions about this direction, but I hope that in coming days the fog of war will disappear. Now let's talk about the Lyman direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the biggest number of icons we received exactly from this area, which means that this direction, the Slovensk direction, has the #1 priority for the armored forces of the Russian Federation. As we discussed in the previous video, the most important video is coming from the river of Seversky Donets. In this video, we can see how the Russian patrol drone was flying above the river of Seversky Donetsk, and at some point, the drone discovered the engineering equipment that was creating a bridge in this area, and the equipment was damaged and destroyed. So this episode took place right exactly in this area, which means that the Ukrainians, according even to this video, were about to finish the construction of the bridge. And telling the truth, it is a very strong construction. For example, you cannot destroy this bridge with FPV drone or with missile. You can't even destroy this type of bridge, this type of construction with aviation bomb. Yes, you can destroy it, but it will take less time for Ukrainians to repair it. You just need to bring additional truck with sand and you will fix everything. So that is why this type of river crossings is the most dangerous for the armored force of the Russian Federation from the logistic perspective. And when talking about this particular place, the Ukrainians finished the construction for almost 80%. So, and when talking about these geolocations, we can say that there are a few more places where Ukrainians have the bridges of the same type. We believe that there are several bridges were created by the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Stara Dubovka. Ukrainians are using this territory for the logistic purposes and to supply and support their contingent on the territory of the city of Lyman. For example, if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of months, so we see lots of icons exactly from this area. For example, we have this video. Here we can see a drone of the armored force of the Russian Federation that was flying in this area and attacking a vehicle. So lots of icons are coming from this area, which means that Ukrainians indeed have some logistic. So somewhere here they're crossing the river and they're sending their units further in the northern direction or in the direction of the settlement of Dibrova. So here we can say another, let's say, pontoon bridge, another area that Ukrainians use for the logistic purposes to supply and support their contingent on the territory of the city of Lyman. And we believe that there is a third area with some logistic roads in this area, and we're talking about the settlements of Sidorova, Prishep. So somewhere here should be another place that Ukrainians are using for the logistic purposes to supply and support their contingent on the territory of the city of Lyman. And Russians are trying to control the situation because the Russians understand that if they control these logistic roads, sooner or later this will lead to the situation when Ukrainians on the territory of the city of Lyman would be completely exhausted without any chances to show any resistance. So the Russians, as we discussed in the previous videos, are trying to soften the Ukrainian defense in this direction, with complete control over the river and over the city itself. This will allow the Russians to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the settlement of Lyman without showing any resistance, or if they decide to show a resistance, they would suffer huge losses. At the same time, the Russians continue offensive operation from the area of the city of Siversk, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. So we haven't added anything additional, we just colored the gray zone. But this is, the situation to the west of the city of Siversk reminds me the situation that took place to the east of the city of Siversk, when the Russians first were softening the defense of the armored forces of Ukraine, and then they were attacking Ukraine positions. But there is just one difference, is that Ukrainians currently have less positions they can use for FPV drone bases. So Siversk was a very strong, very powerful position that Ukrainians use as launching sites for FPV drone operators to attack Russian troops that were advancing in these fields. Now the Russians have the same situation, and Ukrainians, the nearest place where Ukrainians can use as a launching site is the city of Nikolaevka with the Slaviansk power station and the settlement of Alexandrovka. As for these territories, probably there are some places that Ukrainians can use as a launching site, but there are too many Russian drones, which means that the chances to stay invisible are very small. Very interesting update was published today by pro-Ukrainian sources. Today, a pro-Ukrainian source stated that as a result of offensive operation, the armored forces of the Russian Federation managed to cross the Seversky Donetsk Canal and to establish partial control over the settlement of Novomarkovo. Based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything because the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that Russians secured the settlement of Novomarkovo in the April of 2025, so almost a year ago. As for the Dobropolye direction, as we discussed in the previous video, currently the main clashes and the main activities of both Russians and Ukrainians are taking place exactly in this area. This is the Belitska, Shevchenka, Grishina, let's say, front line. The Ukrainians used this bridgehead to counter-attack in the area of Rodinsk with the purpose to dig in deeper. The Russians are trying to improve their positions significantly on the territory of the settlement of Grishina, and the Russians are trying to improve their positions on the territory of Belitska. So Russians are trying to take this foothold in pincers and then to start tightening the noose with the purpose to establish complete control over the territory. This is a very important, let's say, bridgehead, because if Russians are able to establish complete control over the territory and to force Ukrainians to fall back, then the Russians will be able to enter the Dobropolye operational space, or even more, the Russians will be able to enter the Dnipropetrovsk operational space, and they will be able to continue advancing further and deeper and deeper. During the previous 2 days, we start receiving lots of updates from the Novopavlovka direction. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. By the end of the 5th of January, the Russians improved their positions to the north of the settlement of Filia. And today, several pro-Russian sources stated that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to cut the pocket to the south of Novopavlovka. So as you can see, the Russians are trying to shorten the distances between Novopavlovka, Filia, and the settlement of Muravka. So the battle for Novopavlovka is entering its decisive phase. We believe that in coming days we're gonna receive lots of updates from this area, and probably and very likely the map in this area would be adjusted. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates. One of the most important updates is coming from the Zaliznichne Staroukrainka direction. Here we can see that the pro-Ukrainian sources adjusted their maps. They're showing the additional expansion of the gray zone between Gulay-Pole, Zaliznichne, Staroukrainka. According to these two gray zones, the first sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armored forces of the Russian Federation were discovered on the outskirts of the settlements of Zaliznichne and Staroukrainka. So just take a look at this expansion of the gray zone, which means that the battle for these two villages are about to start. Another important thing is coming from the western Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 48 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly. So these are the changes between the dates. This is, for example, the end of the 4th of January, this is the end of the 5th of January, and this is the end of the 6th of January. The Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, managed to take almost in the complete control the western part of the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing. This is a very important settlement because from these positions, Ukrainians who are currently located in these fields would be forced to fall back further in the eastern direction towards the city of Orekhov. So we see that the Orekhov offensive operation is intensifying, and it seems that Russians will be able have all chances to cross this territory very, very fast. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.